The ability to post on Reddit anonymously with a throwaway account, or at least an account where you're not sharing personal details, makes it a pretty good place for people to share their darkest secrets. Today we're going to cover a bunch of the most intriguing and disturbing ones I've come across recently. Let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries and generally disturbing content, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can become a Ko-fi member or a channel member to gain access to uncut videos and other perks, or you can leave me a tip by clicking the thanks under this video. Thanks to anyone who considers this. This video will cover a range of potentially triggering topics, including murder, illness, death, and the KKK. Viewer discretion is advised. You can click the link in the description to become a Ko-fi member and watch an uncut and ad-free version of this video, which includes a few extra entries that were unsuitable for this cut. Around 2 years ago, there was an Ask Reddit thread titled, "What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you?" These type of posts are relatively common on the subreddit, and when they attract a lot of attention, like this one did, you can spend hours scrolling through them. Let's take a look at some of the most intriguing comments on the post. My extended family on my mum's side has a strange practice of turning horrific family events into funny stories to tell at family gatherings and the like. I believe mostly as a way to deal with the trauma. The time my grandfather tried to shoot my grandmother in their living room with the kids present, or when my mum got beat for saying Billy Dee Williams was hot, were among those stories, both of which were told at Christmas parties, even when I was very young. The only stuff that doesn't get turned into fun stories is the stuff that no one knows how to process and just wants to bury. And that stuff I've only gotten tiny glimpses at, probably for the best. The one that stands out is when my grandmother let slide that my grandfather was in the KKK, participated in lists, and was really proud of how good he was at it. Or when I found out later in life that the only reason I saw him growing up, when none of my cousins did, was that he knew where my mum lived but not his other kids, and that us not visiting wasn't an option. Which did make sense, considering his house and everything that happened in it was, in retrospect, weird as hell. Like hanging out with the mute grandkids of his new wife as they played with dead rats in Barbie clothes in a dollhouse made of reclaimed driftwood levels of weird. So there is literally so much to unpack in this comment. First of all, the family just casually joking about OP's granddad trying to shoot his grandma. Now I don't know about anyone else watching this, but the type of things my family joke about are like the time when I fell into a nettle bush as a child, not the attempted murder of my grandma. As for the main revelation that OP's granddad was in the KKK and literally killed people, and he was proud of how good he was at it. Reprehensible is not even close to being a strong enough word to describe his actions. He truly sounds like an absolutely abhorrent person who doesn't even deserve a family. I did take a quick look at OP's post history to see if there were any clues about their age, and from what I found, I'm guessing their granddad is likely dead now. Still, it could be worth them going to the police with any information they have about this. Even if the granddad can't be punished now, it's possible there are still family members of the victims alive to this day who may get some closure from finding out what happened. On a final note, I just want to highlight the last line of the comment. Like hanging out with the mute grandkids of his new wife as they played with dead rats in Barbie clothes in a dollhouse made of reclaimed driftwood levels of weird. I had to read that like 4 times to make sure I got it right, and I still don't have any words to say other than what the hell. There was actually another comment in the same Ask Reddit thread with a similar revelation, quote, Found out after his death that my great-uncle was a grand wizard in the KKK. Opened a chest in his attic with photos from rallies, lynchings and cross-burnings all around some rural part of Alabama. We were actually horrified by the discovery and suddenly realised why he was so negative towards his black hospice nurse, who was otherwise kind-hearted and caring with him and the family. Edit. Since a very large number of you want to keep calling me racist and telling me how much of a f*** I was for burning everything, we, as in my family, I was 16 at the time and had no real say in what the adults/elders decided. We decided to burn all of it out of intense shame for what we discovered. We held prayer vigils through our local church for the people affected by this hatred. Had I been older, I might have taken some of the more damning photos and forwarded them to people who could have brought closure to victims. I made this post at great risk to remaining in my family, as they would still see this as romanticising his actions. To my family, simply speaking his name is done so at great risk to your standing on wills/remaining part of the family. So yes, I do feel like it's too late, because the only thing I have is that my uncle was a member of the KKK for an unknown amount of time before 1950. My family has prided itself in being very inclusive towards other races/ethnic backgrounds. My 7th generation great-grandfather was a member of the Underground Railroad. Several of my other great-aunts and uncles were vocal figureheads of the civil rights movement. They acted as anyone with that much history behind them would in a moment of shock. They destroyed. Blame them if you wish, but please stop blaming me. I didn't make any decisions, and for me it's too late to report anything because I don't have any useful information on something that happened a very long time ago for me. I do sincerely apologise to anyone who sees their chances for closure going up in flames, but I can assure you that for how many other Klansmen I saw in those photos, surely some of their families have already submitted evidence after their passing. My uncle has literally been deleted from our family history, even in such detail as to remove his gravestone so that people cannot leave flowers for him. First of all, it's a shame people are blaming OP for this when they were only 16 years old, and it very much sounds like they 100% condemn their uncle's actions. I definitely think the older family members should have done something with the photos, but it also may have just never crossed their minds. One commenter said, quote, "There are a lot of groups that make timelines and piecing records together for Southern black families. If y'all didn't destroy the images, you should look into reaching to a group to research into those lynchings." Edit. If you are saying this commentary is terrible for not sending this to historians, stop. A lot of the black historian groups aren't well known to those outside of the black community. My gut instinct would be to burn it all too. Hindsight is 2020. I honestly don't know what my first reaction would be on how to proceed if I was in that position, but I can totally understand just being so disgusted that you just want to destroy it and try to get those awful images out of your mind. If OP decided to contact one of these historian groups, maybe there is still some information they could provide that might be useful. It could be worth a try. As for his hospice nurse that he was negative towards, that detail made me pretty sad, but one comment offered a different perspective on it. Quote, "Hospice nurse checking in. It's probable your uncle's nurse could tell he was racist AF and absolutely got joy out of treating him with kindness in the end, knowing full well it boiled his blood that he was in a position to have to accept help from her." I really hope that is the case. OP replied, "Lol, you know, maybe she did. We thought Uncle's racism came from dementia giving him some sort of racist Tourette's, but it's possible she knew all along and she was being nice to him out of spite. We were all just kind to her because she was very helpful regarding his condition. He died of bladder cancer. She was practically a live-in caretaker for the last 4 months of his life. It probably made him see red for the whole last 4 months to watch this woman not be bothered by his slurs and make friends with his family." The next secret we're going to look at was also on the same post. Quote, "She was my best friend of 7 years. We had literally been through it all together. I moved out of state with my now husband, but she convinced us both to move back to be closer with her after about a year. We had no real ties to the state we had tried out, so we said screw it, let's go back. She's basically family. We were also happy to be reunited. She was over almost every night for dinner. We all laughed and talked and had a blast. Best year of my life. Then slowly, she started trying to turn my husband and I against each other. Anytime we had an argument, like any couple does, she would text each of us about how right we were, trying to foster animosity between the two of us. With me, she started talking about how she had a plan B for us, that if my husband and I couldn't make it work, I could move in with her and we'd live happy lives together. With my husband, she started talking about her infertility issues and how she wanted to have a kid just like him, she just needed a sperm donor. This all happened at around the same time, and my husband and I compared texts and figured it out. She wanted to take his sperm and have a baby with me. When confronted about it, she refused to admit anything and started lashing out at us both. It got to the point where she would show up unannounced, banging on the door, demanding a place in our home. It was so terrifying and panic-inducing that we ended up having to move and change our phone numbers. I guess it's so disturbing because I had never had a friend like her, only to find out that she cared about me, but in such an unhealthy and scary way. But yeah, that's my story. Husband and I are great now, by the way. So this is absolutely insane. It's so bizarre and honestly so sad that OP was best friends with this woman for 7 years, and that whole time she never saw her true colours until she tried to pull a crazy stunt like this. It kinda goes to show that you often don't really know people or what they're capable of, no matter how close you think you are. I also wonder if there were more events in OP's life that were orchestrated by this woman, as I highly doubt that she acted totally normal for 7 years, then suddenly just switched. Maybe this is the first time she was so bold about it, but I bet if OP really thought about her past with the friend, she could probably join some dots and realise there were other times where the friend tried to sabotage her for her own gain. I have no idea if the friend actually had romantic feelings for OP, or if she was just a super possessive friend. Either way, she was clearly jealous of OP's marriage and just wanted her all to herself. Thank God OP and her husband put 2 and 2 together and figured out what was going on, rather than letting it ruin their marriage. That'd be awful in itself, but I genuinely think OP wouldn't have been safe with this woman if she did agree to move in with her and go along with the plan. The fact that she was literally harassing OP and her husband after they confronted her shows that she's a dangerous person, and God knows what could have happened if she turned on OP when she was alone with her in a vulnerable situation. The next secret we're going to cover read: the 24 hours before my dad died, stage 4 lung cancer, he was in the ER and then the ICU, and we were unable to be with him because of hospital COVID rules. My mother, sister and myself had been texting and calling him all day and got no response. My mother even called the hospital and spoke with one of his ICU nurses, who said he was awake and communicating fine. He passed very quickly at 3:30 AM the next morning. We were allowed to be at his bedside, but by then he was no longer conscious, so we said our goodbyes and he was gone. Later that morning, while my mum slept, I was calling cremation services to schedule his body for pickup at the hospital and going through his bag of belongings the hospital had returned to us. His phone was in there and I wanted to read all our texts and take some comfort in my last words to him. I opened his phone and all our texts had not been read, not mine or my mum or my sister's. I thought this was so odd, but figured he must have been suffering so much he couldn't find the strength. I began to scroll through his apps and noticed a chat app I'd vaguely heard of. I can't recall the name, but it essentially works like WhatsApp. I opened the app and saw a single contact with a female name. I started reading and realised my dad has been chatting with this girl hourly for the last 24 hours and as far back as I could scroll. He was calling her princess and telling her he loved her, and she was saying she was scared for him and wanted to know what was going on, why he was in the ER, etc. I scrolled back enough to know that this was someone he was having, at the very least, an emotional affair with. My grief was completely hijacked by hurt and anger, and a week later I tracked the girl down and spoke to her via DMs and found out she was 19 years old. She was 17 when they met. He was her high school bus driver, and she told me that they'd been dating for almost 2 years. My dad was 66 years old when he died and dating someone younger than his grandchildren, someone he chose to spend his last moments with and say his last goodbyes to. I hope it made him happy, but it sure is a shitty secret to live the rest of my life with. A secret that will forever overshadow my entire relationship with my dad, with no chance to ever speak to him about it. It's the one secret I wish I'd never found out. I can't even imagine how devastating it must have been for OP to find this out. It'd be bad enough to discover that he was having an affair, even worse to discover it was with a 19-year-old who was 17 when they met, and even more worse to discover he was talking to her the whole time before he died, while ignoring his wife and children. I honestly just can't understand why he did that to his children. I mean, he obviously didn't care about his wife that much if he cheated on her, but why ignore the children too? They'd already be heartbroken that their daddy's dying, and then they're left wondering why he won't even talk to them in his final hours. He must have known that someone would end up going through his phone and finding the messages with this 19-year-old. It kinda makes you wonder if he wanted his family to find out, but only after he was gone so he didn't have to deal with the consequences. It almost feels like a deathbed confession. And let's not skip over the age of his bit on the side. Her being 17 when they first met, and him being her high school bus driver, very much makes it sound like he probably groomed her. It sounds like OP didn't tell their family about it, and as hard as it would be to keep a horrible secret like that to yourself, it probably is for the best for the family. If I were the mum, I would have wanted to know before he died, but after, I'd probably prefer not to find out. Same if I were OP's sister. He's dead, so there's no closure they could really get from the situation, and finding out would only taint their memories. It's just a shame that's already the case for OP though. I would be interested to hear your opinion in the comments though. Would you want to know or not? All I can say is I really hope OP is doing okay and finds a way to move on from all this. The final secret we're going to cover from this Ask Reddit post is this. Not so much a secret someone shared with me, but comments someone has made about a particular murder case in the Midwest US. All I'm going to say is that a family member very close to me has consistently, every so often, made comments about a particular murder that happened in the region they grew up. The murderers were caught, but I believe little to no remains were found, and through investigation it was discovered that the victims were fed to pigs. My family members' comments have always been vague and don't incriminate them in any way or add new information, yet it has always unsettled me, not just because of the infrequent consistency in which they do it, but the serious/hush tone they say it in, which gives me the impression that they could know more than they lead on, be it first-hand or second-hand info. To be fair, rumours spread like weeds in rural America. Doesn't help that at the time of the murders, this relative of mine worked at a slaughterhouse run by another family member, another interesting character and ex-biker, and always enjoys everyone's discomfort when they go into gory detail about the process of dispatching various animals, including pigs, usually at the dinner table. Anyway, this person has always been into true crime, and I don't think many murders happen in the region they grew up, which could explain their fascination. I just can't shake the feeling that they know something and sort of want to share it someday. Maybe I'll prod next time I see them. There's something very eerie about this. It's not like Opie's family member has outright confessed to anything nefarious, but those vague comments that give Opie a strange feeling that they know something more. In a way, being in that position might be even worse than if they did outright confess. At least then you'd know for sure and could do something about it, but being around someone that you have a bad feeling about with no solid evidence, you'd just feel unsettled in their presence, especially if they're a close family member who you can't just avoid. Opie edited their comment to include a link to a post on the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit about the murders. Here it is. The year is 1985. David Till and Brian Onjan were city folk who went to the rural northern Michigan town of Meyer to go hunting one weekend in November, only to never come back. They were reported to have crossed paths with the rough and ready Duval clan and their associates in a rough bar. Words were exchanged and escalated into a fight in the parking lot. The two victims were bludgeoned to death with baseball bats, and their bodies were never to be recovered. Two men, Raymond J.R. Duval and Donald Coco Duval, were convicted largely based on the testimony of a witness who claimed to have witnessed the fight, an alcoholic woman named Barb Boudreaux, who lived in the eye line of the crime scene. Hearsay evidence also played a part in the Duval's sentencing, with the two men drunkenly bragging to associates about killing the two men and feeding their corpses to the pigs. Despite no direct evidence tying them to the crime, the two brothers were sentenced to life in prison 18 years after the events. The victims' bodies have never been found, nor has their car, which is said to have been scrapped for parts. The comments on this post are pretty interesting. A couple of people who live close to the area are talking about how Raymond and Donald, who were convicted of the murders, had a reputation, basically implying it wasn't a surprise that they were found guilty. Further research tells me that they were from an extended family of criminals, and locals tended to avoid them where possible. David and Brian obviously didn't know this though, and apparently showed up at the bar being loud and obnoxious, getting noticed for all the wrong reasons. Barbara Klimek, who was at the bar that night, claimed that one of them groped her, then the other later moved past her inappropriately. When Raymond and Donald showed up, they confronted David and Brian after hearing they were antagonizing a barmaid, and this led to a fight breaking out. Later, Barbara said that one of the Duvals, or a friend, gave her some beers, told her to go home, and said, "You didn't see anything and you don't know nothing." She and her friend drove back to her house, but when they heard screaming outside, they decided to go and see what was going on. This is when she apparently witnessed the murders. David was punched, kicked, and beaten with a bat, while Brian was held by two men, then Brian too met the same end. The bodies were put into a truck, and Barbara and her friend ran back home. Shortly after, a man she didn't know knocked on her door and told her, "You didn't see anything and you don't know anything. If you ever open your mouth, you'll be killed. Pigs gotta eat too." It wasn't until years later that she confided in a friend about what she had seen, and that friend told the police. A detective visited her home, and at first she was reluctant to say anything, then eventually she told him about the fight in the bar. 2.5 years later, she finally admitted to him that she had witnessed the actual murders. The case eventually went to trial, and Barbara, alongside 6 other people, testified against Raymond and Donald, though as the Reddit post said, there was no actual solid evidence beyond Barbara's eyewitness testimony and the others claiming to have overheard confessions. Anyway, back to the original comment about Opie's family member possibly knowing something about the crime. Despite the lack of physical evidence, it seems to be generally accepted that Raymond and Donald were guilty of the murders. But if Barbara's testimony was right, it sounds like there were more than just those two involved. She said 2 men had restrained Brian while another was beating David. She also said that she didn't know the man who came to her house to threaten her, so that presumably wasn't Raymond or Donald, but it presumably was someone who was directly involved in the murder. So I wonder if OP's family member either knows who the other men involved were, or even if they themselves were involved, even if they weren't the ones actually beating the victims to death. I'd be intrigued to know exactly what this person said to OP that made them think they knew something, but unfortunately OP never specified in the comment or after, so I guess we can only imagine. The next couple of secrets we're going to cover come from the Confessions subreddit, and the first is titled, "Snapped and faked a pregnancy in the worst possible way." It read, "Lived with my boyfriend for 4 years. We went back and forth about marriage. He finally proposed, only to back out a few weeks later. I broke up with him and moved back to my home state, 4,000 miles away. 3 months later he called, missed me, still loved me, regretted cancelling our engagement and proposed again. Skeptical at first, we spoke for 7 hours and he convinced me that he was ready to get married. I told him we'd sleep on it, I'd call him the next day, and if he meant it, he'd answer the phone. If not, he wouldn't. He answered and we set a wedding date for 6 weeks. I started to make plans only to have him go radio silent. After 2 weeks, he finally admitted he wasn't ready again and called it off. 4 years later, I get a call out of the blue. He's in my city on business. Can we get together? What the hell, I'm over him, so why not? We met for a drink and caught up. I asked him what happened when he cancelled our engagement. He said he always regretted that and wanted to call me to apologise but was afraid. Despite that, he never stopped loving me and cancelling was his biggest regret, that and never having a child with me. He'd always wanted a son. At that moment, something snapped in me. I told him that I was pregnant when I left him, that I was that night he called me to propose, but I never wanted him to marry me because of that, so I didn't tell him. When he finally broke up with me, I decided to put the baby up for adoption. Unfortunately, later that night, I suffered a miscarriage. It was a boy. He left the table visibly ill. I'd lied to him. There was no pregnancy. I wanted to hurt him as much as he'd hurt me. I never planned to do it. The thought never crossed my mind. I just snapped, knowing that being the cause of my losing his son would devastate him. I never saw him again and never told him the truth. Update. Thanks for all the comments. I have no idea why I did what I did because it's definitely not my usual MO. But when he said what he said, I can't explain it any other way than I just snapped. Seeing how he reacted, he became physically ill. I knew instantly that what I said devastated him and in that moment truly regretted it, but I couldn't take it back. As time passed, I wanted to tell him the truth but just couldn't. I found out recently that he died and now I can't. So this is a tough one. I don't ever think it's okay to fake a pregnancy or a miscarriage. Aside from the damage the lie can cause, it's also incredibly insensitive to any woman who has actually been through that. That said, I'm not going to say OP is an inherently bad person for this. She had been messed around by this man for years, and situations like that can make you do crazy things. She made a really bad decision in a very emotional moment and immediately regretted it. I think we've all said or done something in a bad state of mind that we didn't mean to or we later regretted. Obviously OP could have rectified this to some extent by admitting to the lie when the boyfriend was still alive. That would have been the right thing to do, but let's not forget that he clearly had no consideration for her when his actions hurt her. He let her down massively at least 2 times and didn't have the decency after the first time to just let her move on and find someone more reliable. His behaviour was a huge red flag, and I wouldn't be surprised if the second time he backed out of the proposal, he knew all along he didn't want it. It really just seems like he was deliberately playing with her. Backing out of a wedding one time is of course going to be devastating for your fiancé, but I get that people make mistakes, feelings change. It's better to back out before the wedding than it is to marry someone you're not sure about, but at that point, you let that person go. You don't do what OP's boyfriend did and go back, propose again, only to do the exact same thing. And even then he wasn't finished. He left it 4 years, enough time for her to move on, then decided to taunt her again. OP said in a comment that he knew she'd already started planning the wedding. She'd told all her friends and family, booked the venue and caterer, and bought her dress. I don't know if this was all some weird ego trip for him, or if he just got enjoyment out of trying to embarrass her. Either way, it's not normal behaviour at all, and while again, I do not condone OP lying about something so serious, can you blame her for snapping after this man already wasted years of her life, then came back to waste even more, with no consideration for her feelings whatsoever? It also kinda seems like he was trying to rub salt in the wound at their last meeting anyway, telling her he never stopped loving her and he always wanted a son with her. I hate to say it, but had she not told him this, he probably would have continued trying to worm his way back in and mess her around again and again. Interestingly, a lot of the comments were totally backing her, mostly saying something along the lines of, it was a savage move, but he got what he deserved. I guess this post just goes to show that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. The next post was titled, "My dad finished off my biological dad and my mum doesn't know." I should clarify that by finished off they mean kill, not something else. Anyway, it read, "Apologies for the title. My dad ended my biological dad. For context, I'm adopted at birth and I consider the people that raised me my real parents. I will also some details for obvious reasons as this is a throwaway. Also, some details may be confused as this was a drunken confession by my father after a long night and family problems, but I know him and the broad details are true. The more exact might be a bit off. Also, he told me this about 6 years ago. This happened in the early 2000s, so my parents had been trying to have a kid for almost a decade. After multiple miscarriages and heartache, my parents couldn't have kids anymore. My father came home after work in the hospital to find my mother laying in a blood-covered bed. After a quick drive to the hospital, they found she had a miscarriage and ruptured an artery. They could save her, but she would never be able to have kids. So after a good recovery, my parents decided, since we can't have kids, let's just party and have fun. They went on a cruise, bought a Corvette, the whole 9 yards. While my mother worked a government job, that's all you need to know. And when they got back from the cruise, a colleague of hers asked if she was still interested in having a kid. She said yes, but why? And the colleague told her there is a kid that will be born shortly, and the father has had multiple warrants, and the mother can't raise the kid. They were druggies and both had a lengthy rap sheet. So she talked to my dad and they agreed they would adopt me. A few weeks go by and the proper paperwork had been done and I was born. My parents were there the day I was born. When I was born, one of the nurses who knew I was an adoption baby told my parents to take me and run as soon as they could, because I was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby. I guess that was a big deal back then, I don't know. So that's what they did. As soon as they could, they brought me home. Well, bio parents have 3 months to change their mind from giving away their child. It had been 2.5 months from when my parents got me, and they couldn't have been happier. But my dad receives a phone call one day from my bio dad. Bio dad wanted me back and told my dad he was going to get me back and to meet him somewhere and sign some paperwork and hand me over. Something along those lines. So my dad goes, okay, meet me here at some place, near a lake. My dad never told my mum about this either. He said he had never seen her this happy and would do anything to keep her happy. So my dad and bio dad meet one night at some place. My dad never gave me more details than that, but the last thing he said before he ended the conversation was, "We never heard from her, my bio mum, again, and he's probably still at the bottom of the lake." I could tell by the look on his face he meant it. Now please keep in mind that neither mums were involved. My mum doesn't know about this, and I don't know what my bio mum thinks or knows. My dad and I have never talked about it since, and that's all I know. Admittedly, out of all the secrets we're covering in this video, this is probably the one I'm most skeptical of. Mostly because I'm not sure how the biological dad would have the adopted dad's phone number. Surely any contact would be facilitated by an agency. I guess it's not beyond the realm of possibility that the bio dad tracked him down, especially if it was a small town, or given that the adoptive parents took OP straight from the hospital. It makes sense that the bio dad would know where the baby was being born and maybe could have shown up at some point while the adoptive parents were there. If this is true though, I do wonder if the adoption wasn't as legal as OP has been led to believe. I'm picturing a potential scenario where the bio mum wanted to put OP up for adoption but possibly needed money, so rather than going the official route, somehow found the adoptive parents and agreed to hand OP over in exchange for money. The bio dad may have had no part of it, and when he found out what happened, contacted the adoptive parents and demanded they give OP back or he'd go to the police. In this case, I doubt there were any papers to sign. The adoptive dad probably just told the bio dad to meet him somewhere near the lake, under the guise of giving him his baby back, when in actuality he planned to kill him so none of this would ever get out. The bio mum either didn't know what happened to the bio dad, she just assumed he'd moved on or gone back to prison, or she knew something wasn't right, but she was scared to go to the police in case she got in trouble for selling her baby. It might sound far-fetched, but things like this have happened in the past. It's even possible that the adoptive parents, perhaps specifically the dad, actually coerced the bio mum into giving up her baby, maybe by threatening or blackmailing. The adoptive dad may have let the murder confession slip while he was drunk. He possibly even wanted to tell someone to alleviate his guilt, but he was likely never going to tell the whole truth. If you're confessing to murdering someone's dad, it probably sounds a lot better to frame it as the dad was a drug-addicted criminal who would have been a terrible parent, so you murdered him to protect the baby, than to admit that you participated in an illegal adoption behind the dad's back and you murdered him to save your own skin. The exact story OP told just doesn't really add up, and as I said, that could be because it's fabricated for Reddit points, but also could be because OP was misled about their adoption, and the truth is even more sinister. The next secret is from another Ask Reddit thread titled, "What is the secret that you can't tell anyone because it will probably ruin your life?" It read, "That I'm dying. Gonna sit on that one for as long as I can." Edit. Oh, foolishly I just thought this would get buried in a Reddit avalanche and there would be like 2 flippant remarks. I better clarify a few things. First up, I'm really sorry I dredged up so many memories of people being on the receiving end of this. I don't intend to do that, I'll explain more further down. The deal is, I have HIV, have done for a long time, and though it was pretty gnarly at the start, it was mostly just annoying once it was under control. Last year though I started getting sick a lot and, welp, turns out my meds aren't working so good no more. Neither did the next set. And the current set seems like it's going the same way. Of course, there's a chance one of the meds coming up will work fine and I'll be back to normal, but as things stand, my out-of-control viral load and plummeting T-cell count probably put my lifespan in single-digit years. It's not as dramatic as a mere month's stage 4 cancer diagnosis, and of course I still might wiggle out of it if we find a med that works, but yeah, it's a thing. As for the telling my loved ones, well, Most of them don't know that I have HIV in the first place, so that's an extra sticking point. I didn't not tell them at the start because I was ashamed. It was more that I just thought that I would end up being the one doing the reassuring and educating, and honestly, after surviving the early times, I just didn't have the energy for it. And yes, I know that it's coming back to bite me now. But aside from that initial awkward talk, I just don't know how long this will take, and the docs still might find something that works and I won't be dying at all, and then I'll have turned my life upside down for nothing. I won't let it get right up to the end without telling anyone. I just don't want to do it all for such a flimsy maybe, maybe not, especially when even the worst case scenario will probably take years. I'll let them all know when the writing is properly on the wall, okay? I don't even know why I put it on here. I guess getting my dogshit blood work back last week before going to family dinners and listening to my siblings making all their awesome long-term plans just left me feeling a bit black. To those of you that said kind words, thank you. To those who said less than kind words, I'm sure you're still lovely most of the time. Play nicely with each other. These Ask Reddit threads usually include at least a couple of confessions like this from people who are dying and don't plan to tell their family, and they're always some of the saddest, but also most complex comments on there in terms of what the best thing to do might be. On one hand, if someone is terminally ill, it is to some extent their business. Obviously, it will affect the family one way or another, and that should be taken into consideration. But you can't force someone to reveal something about themselves if they don't want to. On the other hand, a lot of people would want to know if someone close to them was dying, so they have an opportunity to say goodbye, to make the most of the remaining time, to ensure they don't have any regrets or anything left unsaid. I guess it's just a question of whether you'd prefer to be shocked by a death you didn't see coming, or if you'd rather your last few months, years, however long you had left with that person, be tainted with a dark cloud because you know they're going to be gone soon, and each time you see them could be the last. I don't know if there is less suffering either way. It's either a long drawn out period of pain, or all the pain comes out of nowhere and hits you at once. As for the OP of this comment, I can understand his situation is a little more complex than some because his family doesn't even know he has HIV, and unfortunately there is still a stigma surrounding it. Among various misconceptions of how it's transmitted and who is affected by it, some people still believe it's a death sentence, which is not true anymore. Most people with HIV who receive treatment will not develop AIDS. In fact, if they start treatment early, their life expectancy is about the same as people who don't have HIV, and they can live long, healthy lives. Treatment can even reduce the viral load to a point where the HIV is no longer detectable and can no longer be passed on to others. There is also current research looking into cures, so the future looks promising. There is also preventative medication that can be taken to significantly reduce the risk of HIV infection for people who are most at risk of it. It's definitely not a death sentence anymore. The most important thing is to get tested if there's any chance you may have contracted it, so you can start treatment and continue to live a normal life. Unfortunately for OP though, it sounds like he's in a rare position where the medication stopped being so effective and the other options aren't looking too promising either. That doesn't mean all hope is lost though. There are over 30 FDA-approved antiretroviral drugs that can treat HIV. It's entirely possible that some combinations won't work for OP, but others will. He made this comment nearly 2 years ago, and as of 19 hours ago at the time of writing this script, he's still alive and posting on Reddit. So I really hope that means he found a more effective treatment and will continue to live a healthy life. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments, as well as any other topics you might like me to cover in the future. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my Ko-fi members and channel members whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in a new video.